I can't even properly plan out a video. This is literally like the 5th video separate from my original review because I keep leaving stuff out and I keep saying I want to go in and say this. I can't even sit down and write out a script to make a cohesive review. And these people are planning out meticulously years of movies and character development and plot development and storytelling. That is amazing. And that type of stuff is what motivates me to continue doing stuff like this because I want to get better and I want to one day make movies. So Marvel, thank you, because it's impressive. Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to another Talk with Two Scoops. Today we're going to be talking about the Loki series that is currently streaming on Disney+. The last episode was uploaded to Disney+ on this past Wednesday. I wanted to wait until the series had been completed to do this review because we know at this point that the story needs time to develop, and if you go episode by episode, then you're really only working with a little bit at a time. So I thought it'd be easier if I just put it all together in one review. If you haven't seen it, probably don't watch this video because I won't go into too many spoilers, but I will talk about the plot. And if you don't want to know about the plot before you see it, then don't watch this video, or do. I don't really care, it's up to you. So I'll start off by saying I loved it. In the beginning, the very first episode, it drew me in. I was interested. I wanted to see what was going on with the TVA. I wanted to know what was happening with Loki. I wanted to know if he would die by the end of the show. I wanted to know. It raised a lot of questions, in the whole environment, the TVA, just the setting, all of it was very intriguing, and it pulled me in, similar to the first couple of episodes of WandaVision. So I'll run you guys through the basic plot of the series and the conclusion, and after that I'll tell you overall what I thought of this show and how much I enjoyed it or whatever. Okay, so the first episode of the series starts us off with Loki being arrested by the TVA for crimes against the sacred timeline, which immediately follows the events of the 2011 fight in New York City, where he gets the Tesseract and he goes to a different alternate timeline. So he gets arrested for that, and they take him to the TVA headquarters where he is to stand trial for his crimes against the sacred timeline. At this point, he meets Morbius, who is a TVA agent who's currently trying to capture a variant of Loki. We don't know this in the beginning, but that's what it turns out to be. Is Sylvia. She is a variant Loki from a different timeline. So when they first capture Loki and they take him to the TVA, because he's Loki in the 2012 version of Loki at that, he's very hostile about the situation, and of course he's trying to escape because that's what Lokis do. They try to escape. They try to, manipulate the system and get out of trouble whenever they can. But basically Loki ends up in this interrogation room where Morbius is trying to get him to work with him and to help him find his variant, and he tells him that if he does that, then he'll basically let Loki go. Loki isn't really trying to hear it. He's still trying to hatch an idea of how he can escape when Mobius puts on basically a video of his whole life, like a film reel that the TVA has on everyone's life and the events. I don't know if it's like literally from birth to death, and they just choose to skip around, or if it just focuses on main events that happen in their lives that mold them into the person that they are. But we see Loki looking at his life and some of the major points in his life, from his mother's death to his father's death to conversations between he and Thor, and ultimately his death by Thanos. And what I really enjoyed was the emotion that you get out of Loki. We have to remember that this is a Loki from 2012, a Loki who's hell-bent on ruling Earth, a Loki who has no remorse at this point. He's just murdering. Think about the Loki from the first Avengers movie. All of the things that happen from that point moving forward don't exist to him. they haven't happened yet. He was just starting to redeem himself by Thor Ragnarok, and Infinity War was when he really stood up and tried to do something good, and that's when he died. But all of that stuff hasn't happened to this Loki yet. So none of that character development is there. He's that same guy from 2012. So for him to see all of these major events in his life, that's a real moment for him. That's a real eye opener. And I know that I criticize the character for growing so much over the course of these 6 episodes. Loki does make a 180 that is a little hard to believe given the person that we see him to be in the first Avengers movie. You wouldn't expect that Loki to have that type of change of heart regardless of what the situation is. You would think it would take years for him to come to the type of conclusions and the morale changes that he goes through, but it just happens over the course of however long his escapade with the TVA lasts for. But a lot of it undoubtedly is due to what he sees right here, because who wouldn't change even a little bit if they got to see how their life played out, and they got to see every mistake that they made, and they got to see inevitably where they end up. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't right away, but even so, it makes you question things. So with that said, I will give him a little leniency for the growth that seemed to happen so rapidly. I had to go back and watch that scene again, because when I started doing this review, I was realizing that I might need to brush up on some of the episodes, because again, it's only 6 episodes, but it spanned over the course of 6 weeks. That's a month and a half. And so I'm a month and a half removed from that first episode and the events that took place. And that just goes to show that maybe I should have done an episode by episode review. But either way, we're here now. I didn't want to do it that way, so I went back and I watched some stuff. And yeah, the raw emotion that we get out of Loki, just watching those events take place in his life, you start to understand why he grew so much over those 6 episodes. I still think it was quicker than a natural growth would occur. It definitely kickstarted what we got in the final episode of this series. And so for that reason, the first episode was really good to me. And so for that reason, I'll give him a break, because that emotion was real. Tom Hiddleston did a really good job of selling the emotion of that scene, just from his facial expressions, his eyes watering up, the freaking music in the background. What is that, a violin they had playing? Man, were y'all trying to make me cry? Because you succeeded. I shed a tear. Thugs cry sometimes. It's okay. We'll all meet in Thugs Mansion. Just ask Tupac and Nas. But anyway, Morbius is thinking that he can use Loki to help track down this variant, what they call the people who violate time laws or whatever. He thinks that Loki can help him find this time variant who's been eluding them for many years. And it turns out that this variant is a variant version of Loki, and it happens to be a woman named Sylvia. And so at this point, things start to change. When Loki finally catches up with Sylvia and they talk, he finds out that she was a variant who was taken from her timeline. And at this point, his main goal is to figure out who the timekeepers are and to overthrow them, because he wants to rule. He wants his glorious purpose that I don't even think was really a thing too much. He said it maybe once or twice in the MCU up until this point, and I think the series took it to another level that it wasn't at before. But anyway, he talks to Sylvia. He realizes that her motivations aren't necessarily to overthrow the TVA, and so now he's trying to figure out what's going on in her head. And so this starts the bonding between Sylvia and Loki, and will they, won't they dynamic. And it's all interesting, but I think my favorite part about the series wasn't necessarily their relationship, but more so just being interested to see where the series was going and how it would lead into movies. because I have to say that Loki wasn't one of my favorite characters. I do enjoy him. I did enjoy him in all of the movies that he was in, but he was never my favorite character. So when I heard that there was going to be a Loki series, I wasn't necessarily interested, but when I saw the first preview, I was like, oh, this looks like it can really be something. And so it drew me in from that angle. But I wasn't a huge Loki fan, and I'm still not a huge Loki fan after watching the show. But I was very interested to see how this show would play its part in the next phase of the MCU. And what I will say is that it definitely sets the tone for the direction that things are going to go. But anyway, over the next couple of episodes, we see this relationship between Loki and Sylvia start to develop as they try to figure out what's going on with the TVA. We see Morbius's characters start to question the TVA and what they really stand for, and whether or not he can really trust the TVA, and that was interesting. The series doesn't really get going until we get to the 4th episode. That's when Loki and Sylvia end up in this abyss, which is where they find out everyone who's being pruned. I haven't talked about this yet, but pruning is something that they do to the timelines when there's a variant timeline trying to arise. So if somebody does something, for example, that's going to set off a nexus event, as they call it, which can alter the sacred timeline, then they go and they prune that individual and they reset the timeline. But basically we find out by episode 4 that when someone or something or a whole timeline gets pruned, it just goes to this abyss at the end of time where, you know, it's basically going to be destroyed. So Loki and Sylvia and Morbius actually end up in this abyss, but Loki and Sylvia decide to go and find whoever is behind everything by enchanting this cloud slash like guard dog and Alliath. I was about to say, I don't remember what his name is, but the cloud slash dog guard thing, his name is Alliath. And when Sylvia is running from it earlier on in the episode, she sees a vision and she starts to develop this idea that maybe she can enchant it and they can get to the bottom of this whole situation. So that's their plan, and they succeed. And, you know, excuse me if I'm like jumping all over. I'm trying not to go too much into any specific details, not for spoilers' sake, but just because, and I'm just trying to give you like the main course, if you will. But anyway, they enchant Alliath and they get to this castle and they get in and they meet the person who's behind all of this. He who lived, or he who survived, or he who continued. He who remains. Jeez. Who, from research that I've done, and by research I mean other videos that I've watched, is Kane the Conqueror. A different version, there are many versions of him, but this is a older version of him, a version of him who's been around for millions and millions of years and who has seen it all, done it all, and he's tired and he doesn't want to continue what he's been doing. And basically what he's been doing is maintaining his timeline. So he explains to us that before there was this one timeline, there were millions of timelines that were, all stacked on top of one another. And he was able to discover these alternate timelines. And by discovering these alternate timelines, he discovered alternate versions of himself. And at first, it was all harmony. All of the versions of himself were working together. They were exchanging technology and information. But as all things do, at some point, some of the versions of himself became greedy and they wanted to be more powerful and they wanted to dominate, if not destroy, the other universes and the other variant versions of himself. And so he decided to take little pieces from all of these different universes and put them together into one sacred timeline. And so that's what this whole TVA is about, is preserving this sacred timeline that he has created to subdue the chaos that would arise from all of these different universes being released and being allowed to interact with one another. So we find out from that basically, although his methods are unhonest and they are a little questionable, what he's doing is what he personally feels is the best thing to do to keep order and to keep, everyone safe, which all good villains have a good motivation, and it's usually, on a moral ground of whether or not they need to be stopped or whatever. So that's what we're faced with when they finally get to him. And the question is presented to them, do they want to take over his position in maintaining this timeline, or do they want to kill him? And his thing is basically no matter what they decide, the timeline remains the way that it is, or they kill him and he comes back and they just repeat this whole cycle. Loki is listening and he's trying to figure it out, and he's doing some reasonable deduction here, and he's calculating, and he decides that maybe what he's saying is true and we need to be mindful of what we do next, because what if we do something and we cause chaos that then gets out of hand and we don't know how to handle it. But Sylvia, coming from her traumatized childhood, being arrested at a very young age and escaping and running from the TVA for millions of years, however old she is, she says that she had been running from the TVA before he was even born. So she's old, because we know that Loki is at least like 1,500 years old, maybe older. But anyway, so she's old and she has all of this anger and this bitterness, and she wants to kill him. She wants to get rid of him. She doesn't really care what the consequences are. She's like, we're doing this. And so after this little dance fight sequence that Loki and Sylvia have, eventually she pushes Loki back to the TVA through one of those little portal things that they have, and she kills Morbius. And we start to see outside of the window behind him all of these timelines starting to detach from this singular timeline that he's created. And the first thing that came to mind was, if they drop the ball on this Spider-Man movie, Marvel, y'all gonna have some backlash, because all of this hype over the next Spider-Man movie and how it's gonna be a Spider-Verse movie, and everybody is questioning whether or not it's actually gonna happen, and taking forever to drop the preview. Like, come on, we want the preview. At this point, they've basically set it up to where that has to happen. Well, I won't say it has to happen, but it's not even hard to imagine at this point, because they've literally showed us different branches of reality, separating from this one universe. So that's all that they need to give us this movie. That's all that they need to make this Spider-Verse movie happen. So I'm very excited. When I saw that, that was the first thing that came to mind, because Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite Marvel characters. But anyway, when we got to that episode and we saw that, that's when I realized that I think Loki was my favorite of the Marvel series so far. WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now Loki. Of those three, Loki is my favorite, because Loki seemed to have the most consequences and it ended on a better note. Between Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision, I prefer WandaVision. Although I wasn't completely satisfied with the ending, I thought it was a little rushed and a little lackluster for all of the stuff that they were building up to. But as far as the world and the universe and this reality that she created within this town, it was very interesting and intriguing. In every episode, I was curious to see what was gonna happen next. But when they got to the last episode, it wasn't as spectacular as I thought it could have been. And with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in general, I enjoyed the show, but episode by episode, I wasn't really super into it. And now watching Loki, I think is my favorite one. I think that the story that it tells, although episode 3 was a little filler, it had a little filler vibe to it, but with the exception of episode 3, I really enjoyed Loki like every episode, and I didn't expect to. And also, I lied earlier when I said episode 3 was the only episode that I felt like wasn't really necessary. Episode 5, where Loki and Sylvia first end up in the void area, and Loki runs into all of these other variant versions of himself. Classic Loki, Croc Loki, the kid Loki. I'm not even sure who the other guy, what other version of Loki he was supposed to see. We even get to see a frog Loki, if you pay attention, no, that was a frog, Thor. If you pay attention in the very beginning of the episode, when there's this pan that's showing when they're going to the underground area. I don't know why I did my hands like this. It looks weird. But when they were panning down and taking us to the lair where the Lokis hang out, you see a jar and there's a frog Thor trying to escape out of it. So that was interesting. But anyway, even though there were parts of this episode that I really did enjoy, when I think back on it, it wasn't really necessary, because all that we really needed from that episode is the point where Sylvia and Morbius come to rescue Loki, but they meet up with him and they start to try to hatch this plan of how they're going to enchant Alliot. Yeah, so we didn't really need everything else that came before that, although it was funny to see all of the Lokis backstabbing each other. That was really funny. Like, I legitimately laughed at that scene when every Loki thought that he was the top dog, and it turns out that people under him were already planning to overthrow him, and because that's what Lokis do. So that was funny, and I wonder if this whole episode was just for the sake of that joke. But anyway, the episode was by no means bad. I enjoyed it. The story kept progressing, but in hindsight, I don't think that we needed that episode. I think we could have transitioned directly from Loki being pruned to him waking up in the void and skipping back to Sylvia dealing with the things at the TVA to the point where she prunes herself and meeting up with Morbius and then Loki, and then they could have started hatching this plan to enchant Alliance. Meeting up with the other variant versions of Loki wasn't very necessary. I think it was an idea that maybe the writers wanted to do more with, but realized that with the time constraint, they couldn't focus too much how they wanted to. And in that type of situation, I think you either further develop the episode or you just cut it, because this series could have been 4 episodes. Because if you think about it, that's still 4 hours. Basically, that's still like 2 movies, because each episode is like 51 to 54 minutes. So it's not like, we weren't getting a lot. It could have been 4 episodes, or they could have broke them up into 20-minute episodes and, stretched it out to 8 episodes if that's what they wanted to do. But 2 of the 6 episodes weren't completely necessary to keep the plot moving. I wanted to see a better redemption for Morbius too, but with there being a season 2, I'm guessing that's when he'll get it. I know everybody was joking about him getting a jet ski, but I did want to see that. I did want to see him get on his jet ski, and that would have been nice to see, but I guess they're holding out on that one. And also the music, it has like this mysterious but enchanting and like just a very interesting soundtrack to this show. I really liked it. It's very catchy, it gets in your head, and it fits the theme of the show so well. Just this unknown world, this uncertain atmosphere to it that just, it ties it all together. Whoever the sound design person was, man, kudos to you, because it was good. But man, I would be lying if I said watching this show sometimes didn't make me a little uneasy. It makes you question so many things. Like, everything that happened in the MCU up until this point seemed so important, so life or death, so crucial. But then we get to the TVA and we see that they're using Infinity Stones like paperweights. And by the end of the series, we find out that everything that happened was going to happen anyway in the way that it happened. And if it didn't, then the TVA would have came in and they would have pruned the universe and they would have pruned the people who were responsible for it. So it makes you question how important anything really is. I don't know if I'm the only person whose mind went there. I instantly started questioning some of the events that happened and how important they really were, and how powerful any person really is. But now that the timeline has been freed, people have more free will to dictate the way that things go. So that's interesting. But anyway, early on in the series, it had me thinking a lot about just how big and bad Thanos was built up to be. And he's really nothing at this point. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing that Marvel has going, that they're able to get you invested in these storylines and these characters and build them up to be so epic. And then by the next movie or the next show, it's like, dude, you thought that was bad. That ain't nothing. And they just, I really don't know how Marvel is doing it. I am truly amazed about this. I was saying, whether or not you're a Marvel fan or a superhero movie fan or whatever, what Marvel is doing right now is going to be documented in history in years from now when they do a documentary on the way movies and shows are in whatever year. It's going to come back to Marvel and what they're doing right now. It's going to be said that what Marvel did set the tone for the future of the way movies and television shows would be developed. Because the storytelling is immaculate. It's not without flaw, but what they have done for the past however many years, starting from that first Iron Man movie to now, how do you even have that type of foresight? How? How do you have the foresight for 12, 13 years in the future of movies to develop these characters and develop these plots? Like, that is really outstanding. And I won't even say Marvel don't get enough credit, because they get all of the credit that they deserve, but still, it's like, man, we got to give them some more, because they really have changed and shaped the way that television and movies have began to be made. Because if you think about it, all of these movie studios are trying to create universes now. And then the fact that it's not confirmed, it's all but confirmed that the Spider-Verse movie is happening. If that happens, that is one of the craziest things that you could ever imagine. A movie from 2002, a movie from 2012, two separate franchises, not franchises, but two separate movies with different characters coming together with a more current version on the same screen at the same time. Who would have ever thought that that would happen? When I was little and my mom bought me the first Spider-Man movie, a VHS, watching that movie, I would have never imagined that years later I could see, it would even be a possibility that I could see that character on screen with another character playing the same hero, and then another character. I don't know why I'm speaking vaguely, like I don't know their names. Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and then Tom Holland. I would have never imagined. Even when Civil War came out and Tom Holland appeared as Spider-Man for the first time, even then, I couldn't have imagined these three versions of Spider-Man coming together. So if Marvel does this, it's changing everything. And you just got to give them kudos for that, because the foresight and the planning that it takes to make something like that happen is immaculate. I can't even properly plan out a video. This is literally like the 5th video separate from my original review, because I keep leaving stuff out and I keep saying I want to go in and say this. I can't even sit down and write out a script to make a cohesive review. And these people are planning out meticulously years of movies and character development and plot development and storytelling. That is amazing. And that type of stuff is what motivates me to continue doing stuff like this, because I want to get better and I want to one day make movies. So Marvel, thank you, because it's impressive. Yeah, so overall, my thoughts on Loki is I really, really, really enjoyed it. I thought Tom did well as Loki. I thought that his personal growth was a little rushed, but for it to be a 6-episode series, although it's going to be a season 2, so that's how you know it's really going to have an impact on what goes on in the next 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU. I don't know why I said the whole name. So there's going to be a season 2. But for this first 6 episodes, I understand why they had to kind of speed through his character development. But aside from that, I really enjoyed all of the characters. Morbius. I don't know a lot about Kang the Conqueror because I didn't read the comics, but I thought that the guy who played that character did a good job. Again, I don't have any reference to what his character is actually like in the comic books, but I thought he did a good job. He sold me on, his conversation between Sylvia and Loki. So I like that. Everything about the TVA was interesting. I do wish that we could have saw a little bit more of the actual TVA facility. We didn't see too much of it because we instantly went on this quest with Loki and Sylvia. So it would have been interesting to see a little bit more about how things operate in the TVA. But I got a feeling in the next season we're gonna see a little bit more of that now that things have started to change. And I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, Loki, Disney Plus. I recommend you see it if you haven't already. But anyway, as always, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that like